Senator Still, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Obviously, I'm not Nick Messino, but I am a guest host for Nick Messino in this special podcast edition of Voice for Business, going over public policy and the legislative session recap. So thanks for being here, and we'll get into what happened at Sine Die, what happened at the state capitol, but we want to hear more about who you are, your background, and how you got to where you are serving Georgians at the Capitol.
Great. Well, thanks for having me on the show. As a longtime chamber member, it's exciting to be able to wear a couple different hats. So the way that I got into this is I build swimming pools. I'm the largest swimming pool subcontractor in the state. And the way I got involved in this was I was the main advocate for everything regarding water access to fill swimming pools during a drought, to swimming pool construction code. And I spent over a decade of my life in a voluntary basis, never as a registered lobbyist, just advocating for a very small but impactful swimming pool service and construction industry. And made a lot of friends in the Georgia legislature over the years. And when there was an opportunity to run about 3 years ago, I filed and was lucky enough to win a primary and then later to win a general. And so just finished my third year at the state capitol. And I love being able to flip back and forth from being a state senator for 3 months a year and then the other 9 months going back to building beautiful backyards.
Walk us through what happens down at the Capitol. Georgia local government mirrors a lot of what federal government in terms of setup, makeup, process. But whereas in D.C. and Congress, it's year-round, they're in session. In Georgia, it's different. We have 40 days to pass bills. Walk us through how do things work down in the Capitol if you want to get a bill passed?
It's all relational. It doesn't matter how good your idea is. You have to pitch it, and you got to get a lot of people on board. So collaboration is key. And the way it works is, we have 40 legislative days. We really lose the first 1.5 to 2 weeks at the beginning of every biennium, every 2 years. And so you don't really get into work until you're about 12 to 15 days deep. Crossover usually happens on days 26, 27, or 28. It varies a little bit each legislative year. And that's when every bill has to have passed through its committee process to a floor vote in that respective chamber and then cross over into the other chamber and begin the whole process over again. So, for example, this year I was the Senate sponsor of 5 different Senate bills, House bills, but I was the Senate sponsor, and 4 of them never got called up because of the time that we called Sine Die. But a typical life cycle of a bill comes up with a concept, an idea. You go to legislative council to draft it into bill form and see how it fits into existing law. Then you have to find out what committee it's been assigned to in each respective chamber. Then you have to talk to the chairman of that committee to try to get it called up for a hearing. Then you have to convince the committee to pass it through without amendments, or if there are amendments, hopefully they're amendments you can live with. Then you got to get through the dreaded Rules Committee, which House has rules, Senate has Rules Committee, and that's basically the filter that decides which bills are going to be on the floor on any given day. That's the hardest part of all, is to get it through rules. But even if it does that, and then you go all the way through to a floor vote, then you have to start the whole process over again. So even a bill that's passed the Senate or passed the House is not guaranteed to start the process over again. So this legislative year, over 7,000 bills and resolutions were drafted by Legislative Council in 40 days. Less than 10% of those made it through both chambers.
And is that typical, what you see?
90% don't make it all the way, yeah.
Talk about, you mentioned the relational aspect of how to get things done, and you hit the nail on the head about how relationship is key, connections is key, and especially when you're dealing with fellow committee members or the chairman himself or chairwoman themselves, even the speaker and the lieutenant governor. How do you navigate, especially Now that you're in your third year serving in office, how did you navigate building upon these key relations? Did you have them beforehand? Did you develop them after you came into office?
Some of the relationships I had predating coming in. Others, it's just taking the time to get to know people. I have as many friends on the left side of the aisle as I do on the right, so I don't just talk to one team or the other about legislation. It's critically important for me, especially with some of the bills that I had this year, because they were difficult, they were challenging, and they were going to require bipartisan support. So I made certain that the minority leader, that the minority caucus chair, Kim Jackson, that we were good on what we were working on before we launched on it. And we didn't get everything that they wanted. And there were a couple of bills that I pulled back on because I could not reach and agree with them. And I gave them my word that I was not going to bring a bill unless I could get them to a yes. That meant a lot to them in terms of building trust and making sure that I was not going to bring a bill and just try to run it down the middle of the field as a partisan issue. That if I could get them on board with it, then that would make it cleaner and easier, and obviously assure a higher degree of success, especially from the other chamber.
And you build those relationships throughout session, and I'm guessing also during the off season too.
Absolutely.
You know, breaking bread, meeting up with them, seeing at different events, especially if they represent the same areas you do.
We do, yeah. We overlap some areas, and it's important for us to do things together off session. And a lot of them are events that are hosted right here at the Gwinnett Chamber. You know, when you host events or an open house, or if there's some sort of reception to discuss issues, we always spend time together talking about it to try to find out at least where the common ground is.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to your district. You represent Senate District 48. Tell us a little about where that's located, which communities that covers.
So every state senator represents about 200,000 people. Every state rep represents about 55,000 people. So there are about 3.5 state reps per state senator. And there are 56 state senators. Each of us represents about 200,000 people. So my 200,000 come from Johns Creek, a little bit of Alpharetta, and then across the Chattahoochee, we have Suwannee, Sugar Hill, a sliver of Beaufort, and then all of South Forsyth. So I have basically equal thirds of those three counties where they come together. So the whole southern edge of Lake Lanier, both sides of the Chattahoochee coming down through Johns Creek.
Gotcha. Do you have a favorite?
Oh, that's just mean right there, Paul. I live in Johns Creek, but I live a stone's throw from Duluth and can hit the Chattahoochee with a rock from my backyard. My business is in Gwinnett. I do most of my work in Forsyth, and I live in North Fulton. So I pay taxes in all three counties, and am just very fortunate to be positioned right smack in the middle of all three.
So is it safe to say that Gwinnett is in your top 3 favorite counties?
It is absolutely in my top 3 favorites.
Good to know. Talk to us a little about your constituents. How when you meet with your constituents, whether it's at events or in the community, what are they like? What are their mindsets? What do they want to see from you?
So that is a great question. One of the great things about my Senate district, it is the most culturally diverse in the state, the most languages spoken, the most diversity in terms of business mix and type. We are the most affluent district in the state as well. And with that comes great responsibility. It's got to be somebody that can understand the needs of the Korean community, the Indian community, the Chinese community, to be able to speak intelligently about issues that pertain to them, that are very specific to what they're dealing with, whether it be technology or medicine or just trying to be an entrepreneur as well. So I love the diversity that we have, but with all the different high schools that we have and all of the changes that we're seeing in there as well. 3 of the top 10 high schools in Georgia are in my Senate district as well. So we've got a lot of brilliant kids, coming up through there, and they're not afraid to reach out either. I'm always the one with the most number of pages, high school pages that come to spend the day with us at the state capitol, and they love to be engaged, and I love that. That is one of the best parts of my job.
For those in the audience who don't know, what's a page and what is that? What do they do?
A page is a high school kid typically, but they can start as young as middle school, and they come in really early and they stay for as long as we're there. So if it's a short legislative day, they might be done by lunchtime, and if not, maybe they're there until late at night. But their job is to run messages back and forth between guests at the Capitol, lobbyists, government affairs people, to the legislators, or to be able to send messages back and forth to other offices within the state capitol. It's just a great experience for kids to be able to do that, and it looks great on college resumes.
So they're physically carrying a paper message.
They do. They carry a piece of paper. It kind of goes back to the old days of before cell phones or anything else, that they can get messages to and from the Senate chamber because people can't just walk in while we're in session, but a page can.
Yeah. I've used the page system multiple times when I'm down in the Capitol. And one time, this session, I was waiting for the lawmaker to show up to meet with me. And the page, I don't know if it was something got lost in translation or in the mail, or not in the mail, but in the delivery process. But I ended up just texting the lawmaker directly and ended up meeting that way. But don't worry, it wasn't one of your pages.
Good. Well, sometimes we get overwhelmed with messages, particularly when there are some spicy bills that are coming in. People, come in and they want to talk to us. And sometimes we're in the middle of a conversation or a bill debate, and you can't just get it from your desk and leave. So sometimes the messages pile up, and then you just try to, get out when you can and see if you can catch the people at the ropes to talk to them.
Sure.
Hey guys, I'm David Greer, and I'm the publisher of the Guide to Gwinnett, and we are so excited this year to be working with the Chamber to produce what we think is going to be the biggest, best, most comprehensive Guide to Gwinnett ever. Going to be a lot of pages in there that tout the Chamber's services and basically just a pro-business cheer for all you guys out there working day to day, making Gwinnett what it is. So I invite all of you to step up and advertise. We've got some special deals for Chamber members, exclusive deals, special discounts. Call on us if we can help you. Look forward to having you in this year's Guide to Gwinnett.
Let's go back to this session. Just ended the other week. July 4th was Sine Die, last day of session. A lot of good stuff passed, a lot of stuff that Gwinnett Chamber has been championing and following closely. I want to focus on one particular bill that the Chamber has been involved with and businesses across Georgia, which is comprehensive tort reform. And it came in two forms, SB 68 and XB 69. You had a hand in getting this through the finish line. So talk to the audience about what this bill does and why it's so important for business.
So two different bills. Let's start with Senate Bill 69 first. That was
Okay.
kind of the easier one. What that does is it put protections in for companies, particularly technology companies, that were being targeted by third-party litigation. What we found is that technology companies that have patents, some sort of intellectual property that some foreign entity is trying to get their hands on, they would fund a lawsuit in order to, through the discovery process, be able to reveal all their patents. Once they had those patents through the discovery process, they were effectively able to steal that intellectual property, and then they could drop the suit. So it has been a growing problem nationally, but particularly here in Georgia with all of our technology companies, where a third party would front a law firm to file a lawsuit, get that that protected data, that patented information through discovery, then drop the lawsuit once they had their technology, and then steal it effectively. So that's what Senate Bill 69 accomplished. That one did have bipartisan support. Senate Bill 68, that was the big one, right? And it had 8 major parts. I sat on the Senate Judiciary Committee that heard the bill, and it covered several different areas, but the key ones that I think folks were most focused on, number one, premises liability. And there was a narrative floating around out there that the premises liability would not protect human trafficking survivors. That was a false narrative. I'm very close through all my work with human trafficking support groups. That was entirely false. And in fact, we had put a specific carve out in there early on in the bill to make sure that the victims were protected on that. We also put limitations on nuclear verdicts, where juries can't just give $1 billion reward to somebody. We closed the gap on the gap of what actual damages were versus what was being sought by plaintiffs' attorneys. We call that phantom damages. Mm-hmm. So making sure that all of that information can be disclosed as part of it. And then another part of it was regarding seatbelts. Whether or not you're wearing a seatbelt as it pertains to an accident, does that include something that should be revealed to the jury? Were you wearing a seatbelt or not? If you got ejected from a vehicle because you weren't wearing a seatbelt, their decision as to how to award damages would be, that would be an important piece of information. So that was included in the bill as well. Unfortunately, that was heavily partisan on the vote, but I was a signer of the bill. I was part of the committee that heard the bill and certainly was there when the governor signed it into law. So for the business community, I think it was the single biggest win that we had, other than, of course, the very obvious ones on income tax reduction.
Yeah. And I appreciate your work on that. I do want to go back to what you mentioned about the survivors of sex trafficking. The Gwinnett Chamber has always been a strong supporter of tort reform, and when we passed our public policy agenda, with that line item that specifically said we support a fair, consistent, and predictable legal climate, we also included language in there regarding strengthening and supporting protections for survivors of sex trafficking. Pat McDonough, who's on our board, Anderson Taincar, a good friend of ours, he also helped, I guess, what I would say is improve upon that language that the Senate had in their bill, originally. So we do reject the narrative that it didn't help those victims, but we also found ways to improve upon that language to make it even better.
I love that you mentioned Pat. So he's a friend. Anderson Taincar, many friends in that firm, and love their support here in the community. Pat and I talked extensively about the carve out to make sure that we put the protections in there as it relates to his good work in that area. And I believe that the final version of that bill is one that gives him the protections that he was asking for, to make sure that we're giving that consideration to trafficking survivors.
Yeah. Overall, we strongly supported it from day one. And we had some great partners at the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the Metro Atlanta Chamber, of course, our friends across the state and the region, really championing the passage of this bill. Of course, our governor as well, who made this his number one priority this year for the session. There's one constitutional requirement that lawmakers have this session, and it's not passing X number of bills. It's not getting tort reform done. What is that one constitutional requirement?
We got to pass a budget, and it took us until day 40 to get there. But we got it done early in the afternoon on sine die, and the old adage is that there are 4 budgets. There's the governor's budget, there's the House budget, there's the Senate budget, and there's the one that we all agree on and compromise on at the end. So the Senate led on the most conservative budget with that. The House's version had quite an increase in spending. We had to call a lot of that back. But when you're looking at a year, especially with revenue decreases in forecasts, you need to tighten up a little bit, and this was one of those years to do it. Yes, we have a surplus, but when you think about the size of the state budget, right? So we're working on about $36 billion, Georgia taxpayer dollars. That doesn't include the federal match. Anytime somebody comes to me with an idea, we want to expand this or we want to fund that, I ask them very simply, that's a great idea. I love your idea. What would you cut out of the state budget to fund your idea? Or conversely, who do you want to tell that we're going to increase their taxes to fund your idea? And if there's not an easy answer to that, then that answers the question, right? And so people don't really think about that. They think, well, we have a surplus. If it takes $36 billion a year to run our budget, And think of our state budget like a pie graph. Half of it, K through 12, right off the top. A quarter of it goes to healthcare, Medicaid. The other 25% goes to everything else that our state does, from roads and bridges to you name it, the environment, to everything in between, to running all of our other state agencies are in that other 25% bucket. So when folks say that, we want to spend part of the surplus, the surplus is for one-time expenses. We were fiscally conservative to build a surplus. But if you use that to fund something that's a permanent line item, and let's just say for simple math that some expansion or some program is going to cost $1 billion a year. We have $11 billion in surplus. Let's use it for that. Well, if we fall on hard times, if we have another, say, COVID type event, and we don't have a governor like Governor Kemp who's going to keep our state running through COVID, we're going to burn through that surplus in 3 months. That's all the surplus we have. 11 of 36 is less than 3 months surplus for our total state budget. So if you want to increase something by $1 billion, we have $11 billion. Let's use $1 billion for that. You're going to run out in less than a decade to fund that program without raising taxes. Mm-hmm. So our job is to collect taxes and then to spend those taxes in a very conservative, fiscally responsible way. We don't want to be California with a $100 billion deficit on our state budget. We run on a balanced budget in Georgia, and we're going to keep it that way.
Yeah. And is that required that it has to be a balanced budget?
Yes.
Right. And we do appreciate the fiscal responsibility approach of spending taxpayer dollars. There was a bill that was passed this session that further reduced the state's income tax.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
So for 3 years in a row, Governor Kemp has continued to draw down our state income rate that we're doing on that, and then also gave another $1 billion of our surplus back in income tax credits. So for individuals filing, it's $250, and then for families, it's $500. And while some people paid more in and less, he just made the decision that it was best to distribute it to everyone equally, and just to simplify the rebate without getting overly complicated about who paid what, where, when. That way, everybody felt the benefit from it. Yeah. So I don't know any other state that is continuing to draw down on their state income tax rate and then also to be able to give $1 billion year over year on rebates on people's taxes too. So I love the way that Governor Kemp has been able to really lean into that and make sure that we're giving people their money back. If we're not using it at the state capitol, let's make sure that we're not keeping it any longer than we have to.
Sure. Earlier you mentioned that a little over 90% of the bills that are introduced don't end up getting passed. We work in a 2-year cycle, so the bills that didn't get passed at the end of Sine Die, do they have to refile? How does it work in terms of?
They have to start the committee process over, right? But they will. Many of those bills will just end, and then some of them will come back up again. For example, a bill that I've been involved with for 3 years now, and we haven't been able to get it across the finish line, is for DNR, Department of Natural Resources, where we have a bill. It's passed the House. We just need to get it through the Senate. That gives DNR power to issue fines and citations for abandoned or derelict boats in our waterways, coastline, and our lakes. So, for example, if somebody abandons a ski boat and just leaves it floating on Lake Lanier, DNR has the ability then to track down the owner, issue citations for boat abandonment, and be able to use those funds for the cleanup and the removal of that abandoned vessel. It's more prevalent on the coast, but we have over a dozen abandoned boats in Georgia lakes as well that we need to get cleaned up for boater and swimming safety.
Man, I wonder what that's from. Is that from crazy parties at Lake Lanier that's happening that we don't know about?
You would think. No, it really has more to do with a boat reaches a point of not being able to maintain it, and the owner doesn't have the ability to to maintain the boat or to haul it out themselves. And so they just walk away from it and just let it be someone else's problem, which is incredibly unsafe, but it's also, it really falls under illegal dumping as well.
Sure.
So it's been a real problem on the coast where people will drive derelict boats up, some backwater channel and then just ditch the boat and have a friend pick them up, and then they'll leave it thinking that if they scrape the sticker number off or the whole number off, they can get away from it. But we're trying to put processes in place to hold those people accountable and to be able to not just make it a burden of Georgia taxpayers to clean up that mess.
Yeah, for sure. I want to talk about going back to how bills get passed from one chamber to another and make it through the entire process to get it ultimately signed. There are some unique ways that people can go about keeping a bill alive, so to speak, and talking about crossover day. You may have some experience in that in the past, but can you talk about what are some of the mechanisms that lawmakers use to get their bill through the finish line?
I'll give you a great example using one of our fellow Gwinnett Senator Sheikh Rahman. Sheikh's a good friend of mine, represents Norcross in Southwest Gwinnett. He has been trying for the past couple of years to pass an outdoor classroom bill that would allow schools, particularly elementary schools, but any K through 12 public school, to be able to get the funding needed to create a true outdoor classroom for outdoor learning. The State Department of Education asked me to carry a bill this year, kind of the same title code section, that would allow teachers to have 2 additional paid days off per year. So to go from 3 PTO days to 5. Wouldn't be any additional cost to the state because teachers are allocated X number of days anyway, but this just gives them 2 extra days for PTO, for personal days, to transfer from sick to personal. Because they're the same title code section, there is an economy of scale to the number of bills that can pass, especially if they're all in the same subject area. So I went to Sheikh and to Senator Bo Hatchett, who was actually carrying it for Sheikh this year, and just trying a different path to success on it. And we amended my bill onto his bill, so it just became another section onto his bill. So amending a bill is the easiest way to do it. In the House, they do it in committee. In the Senate, we can do it on the floor. In the case of this amendment, I did it with Sheikh's consent and Senator Bo Hatchett's consent to make sure that everybody was on board with what we were doing. The Department of Education wanted it. There was no pushback. It didn't conflict with it, and it sort of enhanced the bill as well. So that's the most common way, is just to do an amendment. Sometimes an amendment is striking one line. Sometimes it's changing a word. Sometimes, and I've seen this done, where it's a total committee sub, and the sponsor of the bill comes to present it in a committee, and the chairman reveals to the representative or the senator that that's a great idea and all, but here's the new bill, and we're doing a total committee sub on that. And that's when things get really squirrely. It doesn't happen often, but it has occurred.
It's like gutting what was there and replacing it entirely.
Something entirely different.
And does the title of the bill have to change at all? Or does
No, it's got to be the same title code section, but other than that, everything else could be different. So an example of that was a South Georgia state rep, Lisa Hagan, had a bill, and in her hometown of Lyon, Georgia, that is the capital for the soapbox derby. And it came to a Senate committee that I was not on, and I do not support casino gambling. But the committee chairman informed her, as she was presenting her soapbox derby bill, substituted that one-page bill with a 35-page full expansion of casino gambling and sports betting. And it killed the bill, but it also was a great lesson in how quickly a bill can morph from one thing to another. And that was, ironically, because it's racing and soapbox derby, that was the same title code section they use for casinos.
Mm-hmm. Man, that is very unique and interesting, and I don't think a lot of people know that that's a tool that lawmakers can use.
We don't use it often, but occasionally it has to be utilized. It's not the tactic that I use with my legislation. I try to make sure that whatever I have is something that the bill author is going to know of what's happening, and if there's an amendment to enhance a bill, to do something like that, I think that's a great way of looking at it. But not when you're doing wholesale, changes without the bill author's consent.
Do you have lawmakers that you closely work with, interested in those that are in the same aisle as you, but also more interested in the folks on the opposite aisle that work well with you?
So Senator Josh McLaurin, he goes from the southern edge of Johns Creek all the way down to 285 Sandy Springs. He's been trying the past couple of years to pass a bill to hold the booting industry. Like if you get your car booted, if you've parked in town and you didn't pay your parking, you know what that is. He wanted to not ban it entirely, but he wanted to put the same restrictions in there that towing companies use, like you can't monitor lots and there has to be some level of due process notification. I was a signer on that amendment that he used as a friendly amendment onto another related bill, but he and I had been working for 2 years on that, and we were successful. Now we're just awaiting the governor's signature on it, but we feel very positive that that we're going to see some changes in that. And booting can be predatory. I'm not saying it always is, but it can be. And I've been the victim of predatory booting. Most folks I know have in some degree, and they need to be held accountable for that and follow the same rules as anybody else that is in that industry.
Sure. And I bring that up because when I open my computer and read the news, or I turn on TV and read the news, a lot of, the majority of what I see and read is very divisive, or it's very polarizing. And to the average person who doesn't follow what's going on down in the Capitol, they're thinking, man, you guys are just fighting every day of session and bickering. But in reality, I argue with them, it's actually the opposite. Can you shed some light on the bipartisanship that happens down the Capitol that people don't read about?
The media has an expression: if it bleeds, it leads. They want division. They want the spark in the story because that's what sells subscriptions and that's what keeps people coming back, right? I am not in the news very often because I'm pretty boring as a legislator. I'm passing things that are getting degrees of bipartisan support, and I think most people need to be focused on that. I wish they were. The amount of camaraderie that happens is kind of a beautiful thing. For me, most of the conflict, most of the fighting really comes between Senate priorities versus House priorities, not Republican versus Senate or Democrat. Yeah. That doesn't make the news because there's nothing spicy about that, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to read how Senators Sheikh Rahman, Bo Hatchett, and Shawn Still work together to pass an outdoor classroom and teacher vacation day bill. Nobody's going to read about that, but it helps our teachers. It helps our classrooms. It helps our kids.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting to see and hear, but we do appreciate your service representing businesses in particular, but especially Georgians in District 48. One last bill that I want to talk about that it slipped my mind, but it's not a bill, it's a resolution, SR 68. Happy accident that is also the same number as your district. SR 68.
48.
I'm sorry, XR 48. SR 48 is called the Gwinnett Chamber Day at the Capitol resolution. One of my favorite bills that you've ever done.
So an SR is the Senate resolution, SB is the Senate bill. SR 48 was my way of honoring all the good work that the Gwinnett Chamber does, that you do, that Nick Messino and the whole team do, because without a strong Chamber of Commerce, you don't have a strong business community. You don't have a unified voice in that. I love the work that the Chamber does. I love being a member, and I love being able to engage people on business matters because that's what chambers need to be focused on. They need to be focused on what is the legislation that makes doing business in our county or our state better. And SR 48 was my way of saying thank you to all those good things that you're doing. So that was just my way of saying thanks back.
Yeah, and thank you for leading that. Every year, the Gwinnett Chamber takes a small group down to the Capitol to meet with our delegation members and the governor and the lieutenant governor a speaker, and it's always a good time to see the good work that you guys are doing down there, and to be present and give you guys encouragement.
We appreciate it.
So for our businesses at the chamber, they're busy running their business day-to-day operations. They may not have time to weed through everything that happens on the Capitol, how things work, who to go to, who to talk to, how to get things into the right hands. If there is a business that's looking to share a good idea that they have or raise a concern that's impacting their business that a state representative or a state senator can shed light on or make a difference on, what's your advice on how do they begin to know where to go?
So you don't always have to go to your state rep or your state senator to get a voice. Obviously, it's a good place to start, and you should know who your legislative representative is. But you can also dial into somebody who's not your elected person and go to somebody else within the same county or not. It may even be the state. When we had the Buckhead City Bill a couple of years ago, it was carried by a state senator from Columbus. So an issue can be anyone in the chamber. Even though I represent 200,000 people, I represent every Georgian, and I take that role very seriously. As far as, who to talk to and where to find that, we have a great website, great tool for the state capitol for every bill that's ever been signed or not signed or where it is in the committee process. LEGIS, like legis.ga.gov, and you can search for anything by a keyword. So if you're looking for something on a very specific talking point, acupuncture, for example, if somebody wanted to find out if there's ever been a bill introduced in the last couple of years on acupuncture, you could just keyword search it on that, or you can do it by number, or you can do it by author. See what your legislator's been involved in. See what kind of legislation they carry. See, what did they do in their day job, so to speak. Are they an activist, or are they somebody in the community? And then be able to drill in on that, and certainly be able to use you here at the Gwinnett Chamber as a resource on that is an easy way as well. And because you know all of this, and you know who best aligns with somebody's issue or concern of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I do enjoy when a member comes to me and goes, "Hey, I want to get more involved. I want to share this idea I had, or I want them to come visit my business operations." And
Sure.
I find out who their state rep or their state senator is, and reach out and make that connection, and even be there when I can during, let's say, a tour or a lunch.
Yeah, no, it's a great way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts on just reflecting on this past session and what's ahead for you in terms of preparing for next year's session?
So looking ahead, it's an election year next year. Every legislator is on a 2-year cycle. Our constitutional officers are on 4-year cycles. So our constitutional officers are going to be on the ballot next November. One of our U.S. Senate seats are going to be up, all of our congressional seats, and every legislator. So I think that it's going to be the Wild West when it comes to campaigning, when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to just all the messaging. And people are going to grow weary of it between mail, text, calls, door knocking, you name it. It's going to get pretty crazy. I'm going to be so buried with committee work, even study committees here in the off session, that I'm chairing 3 different study committees in the off session on different subject areas that are going to keep me busy without thinking about any of that other stuff. So I'm just going to be focused on doing work, and then hopefully the results speak to themselves, in terms of what that looks like. If I pull a primary opponent, fine. If I don't, fine. If I pull a general opponent, fine. And I'm one of those people that just takes it as they come. I don't think about it, worry about it, stress about it until it happens.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Senator, for your time. I do want to thank our presenting sponsor, Gwinnett Magazine, and our mug sponsor, Capital Restorations. thank you to our sponsors. This podcast would not be possible without their support. Senator, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with me and share some insight about what happens at the Capitol. We are a business-focused chamber of commerce, and one of our 3 values is advocacy, being a voice for business. And thank you for being a partner of ours to be a voice for business down at the state capitol.
Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.